Shall I kick off then?
I'll check if the stream actually works.
Can you see?
Not completely.
Okay.
That's much better.
Yeah? No worries.
Слав, ты можешь проверить работу?
What's that? Oh, yes, please. That would be nice. That would make me feel very flattered. I'll. Whoa.
Just in case. Check my pronunciation.
Hayden.
Hayden Wilkinson.
Yeah, that's it. That was quite funny with the last name. It has happened before. Or with Win. Yeah, it's happened before.
Sorry, I slightly a little bit more.
Ooh.
First I was surprised about your surname, but then I remembered Scott Alexanderson's post about EA Global. One of presenters whose name was Cash Dollar.
Oh dear. I don't want to be in the same camp as that person. But no, fair assumption. Oh no.
We're trying to figure out the picture problem. We're trying to figure out
What's the problem?
the problem is I'm not sure how to add the video source to the final output. So here's the input. And I didn't have enough time to. Can I just no?
Unmute my magic box.
Алиса, нормально? Я хочу представить Хайдена. Меня будет слышно или мне нужен здесь микрофон?
Тебя не будет слышно.
Okay, here you go. Come nice and close.
Ну, звук раньше был, я не
Here you go. It's okay, we can...
Hi everyone, today our guest is Hayden Wilkinson. Hayden is an operation director at Global Project at Oxford, and he worked as a researcher at Giving What We Can, and he's...
Thank you, Michelle. It's lovely to be here. Just let me get this sorted out. Okay. How's that? Yep, perfect. Yeah, thanks everyone for coming. It's lovely to be here at Kochiga in an official...
This track is louder,
Louder,
slower,
into the...
and easier.
Okay, yes, thank you. I was going to say, if anyone has trouble understanding, or if I'm speaking a bit too fast or too quiet, just subtly put your hand up, and I'll repeat myself and try to be better. Okay. So tonight I'm going to be talking about effective altruism and risk. That is, how should we choose between ways of helping others when some actions are sure to help, sure bets, and some actions might not help. They might almost definitely fail, in which case they're long shots. But how do we compare these long shots to these sure bets? So, just in case anyone is sort of new to effective altruism, I'm going to give a bit of an intro, partly also just... Oh, sorry. In case anyone is new to effective altruism, I'll give a bit of an intro to what it is, but also just because I like talking about it. I think it's pretty exciting, and probably sort of one of the most promising social movements of the 21st century. So, here are two things that I believe. The first, we should help. In our world, there's suffering and disease and death, and that's not okay. And if we can help those who are experiencing those things, if we can help those in need, then we should. Second thing, if we help, we should do so effectively. If you get a choice of who to save, you just save as many as you can. So, I'm going to give an example to sort of just illustrate what this looks like, or what this might motivate you to do. So suppose you're a firefighter. I assume that's... everywhere has firefighters, right? You're this firefighter at the front, and you've got two houses that are burning down. But you only have one hose to put out the fires. And you can only reach one of the two fires at a time. So you can only choose one. One house has one person trapped in it. And the other one has 200 people trapped in it. I spent a little too long doing the animations. Cool. That's roughly 200. Now, depending on where you point your fire hose, you could save one person, or you could save 200. You know this because you've done your research. You know that more people live in this apartment building. I couldn't find a picture of an apartment building. More people live in that than in a single house. Or maybe a local person has walked up and told you that, yeah, that building is full, that one is almost empty. Either way, you have some evidence that only one person lives in this house and 200 people live in the other one. That's the only difference you know of between the two houses. Everything else is the same. Now, it is true that saving either house full of people is better than doing nothing. Both of those are good things. Even saving just one person is a really good result. I wish I could save one person every day. That would be great. But at the same time, you can do even better. If you consider the information, you take the data and the evidence into account, there's 200 times more people in that house. And there seems to be extra reason to save them rather than this person. So with only one hose to point somewhere, you might as well point at the 200 people. 200 people are going to die otherwise, whereas in this case, only one person is going to die. You'll save more lives, you'll have a greater impact, and 200 people are going to be really thankful that you did. It's a pretty similar case when you're donating to charity. So say I'm pretty wealthy, I wish. Say I've got $1,000 to donate, or the equivalent in rubles. I don't know the exchange rate. Now, I could donate my $1,000 to the charity that has the best advertising campaign, or I could donate it to a pet cause. For instance, my grandmother died of cancer not long ago. So at the time, I considered donating a bit of money to an Australian cancer charity. I'm from Australia, by the way. It's not just a random choice. But the thing is, Australian cancer charities, they can't really do much with that donation because the costs for treatment are much higher in Australia and in Russia and in all of Europe than they are in sub-Saharan Africa or rural India. So my donation wouldn't go very far in that case. If, say, I spent it on treating Kaposi's sarcoma, which is a cancer that's very common in sub-Saharan Africa, choosing cancer specifically, but in a developing country, my $1,000 would buy someone 8 weeks of extra life. It would keep someone alive for 8 weeks when they otherwise would have died. Elsewhere in the world, it would be much less than 8 weeks. So, but what else could I spend it on? Here are a few things. We've shrunk down. So Kaposi's sarcoma, this developing world cancer, is here. It's sort of 8 weeks, but now these numbers are in years. Over here, we could actually treat the same disease with antiretrovirals and prevent it from happening, and that would save us about, I think that's 2.5, maybe 2 years of life. But if I just picked a different health condition, a different disease, malaria, and I spent all my money on bed nets, $1,000 could buy someone 30 years of life. I could not just save a life, I could save a life 30 years before, I could keep someone alive for an extra 30 years. So you might immediately see the link between this and the firefighter example. So in reality, there are fires raging every day. 16,000 children die every day from preventable diseases that they just can't afford to treat because they don't have much money. Around the world, all combined, 151,000 people die every day. There is an enormous amount of death and suffering in the world, and we just can't reach all of it, unless we happen to be trillionaires. We don't have infinitely many fire hoses, we don't have infinitely much money, so we need to prioritize between those things. Here's another situation where we need to prioritize, or another situation in which we can do good, or we can do good effectively. So a bit of research I read a while back said that if you were really good at medicine, you had a scientific mind, and you decided to become a doctor, then over the course of your life, you would end up saving 4 lives that otherwise wouldn't have been saved. Because remember, medicine is quite competitive. If you don't become a doctor, someone else will. So most of the lives you save would be saved anyway. But if you're talented, you can save an extra 4, maybe. But what else could you do with your career? This thing that you've got to spend on different ways of saving the world. One thing you could do, this says non-profit founder. So you could found an effective charity. You could found, say, a charity that gives out anti-malarial bed nets to prevent malaria. And the estimates there are very rough because, of course, it depends on how good a manager you are and all this sort of thing. But my best guess when I was doing calculations this afternoon was about 500 lives saved over the course of your career. And now that's more than 100 times more than the doctor would have done. So it's a similar sort of case that people are dying, lives are being lost, and depending on if you want to use your career to help people, then there are different careers with differing levels of impact. And I think it's better to choose the one on the right if what you're trying to do is help people, because we should always help more people, all else being equal. So, effective altruism, as I see it, is basically these two things. One, committing some amount of your time or your effort or your resources to helping others. Maybe it's a donation, maybe it's spending your career doing something that will help. And two, using evidence. If anyone's a doctor, I'm sorry, being a doctor is great. 4 lives is a lot. It's just that if you're at the very early stage of just... Cool. So, of course, not all interventions or not all ways of helping people are quite so simple. Not all ways of helping people are certain to actually help. Some things, like trying to change government policy, or change institutions, or change the medical system to save more lives, that's quite hard to do. You could spend your entire life doing it, but there might be a 1 in 1,000 chance that you succeed and you make that change happen. Other things, mostly along the lines of risks to the world. Ooh, nope. That one. So one thing you could spend your life working on is trying to reduce the risk of nuclear war. Thankfully, that risk is lower today than it used to be, thank goodness. But if you went into certain types of diplomacy or government or think tank work, you might be able to spend your life just trying to make that risk lower. Of course, there's a chance, or there's a very good chance that nuclear war never would have happened if you hadn't done that. But there is a chance it would have, and you don't know. And so when you go into it, you're trying to reduce this chance of catastrophe. But it's a long shot. There's a very good chance that you won't actually have had any impact. That doesn't mean you shouldn't try. Another example, pandemics, like Ebola recently, or going back further, the Spanish flu, which killed, I think, like 20 million people. Some enormous amount. Anyway, don't have my citation, but that was in the early 20th century. The plague in, I think, the Middle Ages sometime, again, I don't know the century, but the plague killed, I think, 1/3 of the population of Europe. This was quite a lot of death and havoc. So this is something that there's always a chance it will happen again. There's always a chance that some disease will break out and it will be absolutely catastrophic. And so you could spend your life working in global health to reduce that risk. And of course, it might not have happened, but you don't know that. There's also a chance it might have happened, and so your actions only have a small chance of making the difference. But maybe that's still worthwhile. Another example, which is even more of a long shot, maybe, or so it seems. If we look further out to the next half a century or something, technology is obviously developing pretty quickly. We can sort of roughly think about what might be on the horizon. So things like synthetic biology. People in a lab might be able to engineer diseases which are more deadly than anything we've ever faced. Chemists and engineers might be working on sort of nanotechnology. I know a few who are, go really badly. Again, this is decades out, but these are things that if they went badly, they could go very, very badly. Also, advanced artificial intelligence. It's potentially not a good idea to go making an entity smarter than ourselves. Kind of like chimpanzees probably aren't too happy about having humans around, given that we kind of dictate what happens in their lives. But there's some small chance that will go very badly in the next like 50, 100 years. So these are small risks, but potentially worth worrying about. Here's, oh, okay, it's very small, but I can kind of point it out to you. So this is a survey that was done at Oxford University of experts in these fields. So experts in biology and diplomacy and computer science. They estimated that nuclear terrorism over the next, or by 2100, has a 15% chance of killing 1 million people. It has a 1% chance of killing 1 billion people. And it has this very small chance, 0.03%, of wiping out all of humanity. Natural pandemics, 60% chance they kill 1 million, 5% chance they kill 1 billion, and small chance they kill everyone. Similar things for nanotech, nuclear wars, there's a 10% chance that kills 1 billion people in the next 80 years, which is worrying. Engineered pandemics, which are a bit scarier because natural pandemics, we faced a lot of them before, but engineered pandemics, we haven't seen many so far. Wars in general, artificial intelligence, molecular nanotech weapons. We just don't know what that's going to look like. And then overall risk of complete catastrophe resulting in human extinction, 19% by 2100. That's what the experts think. And I know the experts know a whole lot more than I do, so that makes me worry a little bit. So we could devote our charitable donations and our careers and our volunteer time and our political votes to preventing these things from happening. Of course, there's only a small chance they will happen, and there's an even smaller chance that we can make a difference to them. But if we make a difference, then that's saving 1 billion people, or that's saving 8 billion people, or preventing humanity from going extinct, which is not just a matter of saving every single person alive today, but allowing the next generation to exist, and the generation after that, and after that. If the Earth remains habitable, that means 10 to the 16 people. I realize this is not easily visible, but sort of a lot of people, 10 or 1 with 16 zeros after it. 1 billion is what, like 10 to the 9? So that's 10,000, 100,000 times more people than are alive today. No, 10,000, yeah. 10,000 times more people than are alive today. So the benefits are enormous if we do make a difference to these things. At least they might be. So, to figure out whether we should spend our time working on things which are pretty safe bets, like working on global health, donate this much money, you will save a life, versus working on something weird like nanotech or policy controlling nanotech, which has a tiny chance of saving everything. How do we choose between these things? I think that's a hard question. So to figure it out, we need to decide how much is it worth to have a on the bottom. I'm going to show the probability of the thing happening, the probability of saving a life. Here I'm going to show the value, so how good it is to have that probability of saving a life. And we can put 2 points on this graph straight away. One, if we have 0 probability of saving a life, that's worth 0, right? And if we have probability 1, 100% of saving a life, that's worth 100% of saving a life. So we have these 2 points to start with. We know where they are. But as for in between, that's a bit uncertain. We can make a bit of progress. So we know if we have a choice between 0 chance of saving life and a small chance of saving a life, no matter how small, that's better than 0. May not be much better, but it's certainly better. And the better the chance, the better we should think it is. The more the probability of having saved a life, the more value we should ascribe to that. So this is going to keep going up. There's going to be some sort of line going between the 2 points. Now, it doesn't have to be a straight line. You might have it go like that. You might have it go like that. But it's got to be increasing from one point to the other. The different curves here are quite important. So the straight line is saying that if you've got probability of half of saving a life, that's half as valuable as actually saving a life. Yep. If you put your curve a bit higher, you say, well, if I've got a chance of a half, if you're on the straight line, you'll say, yes, that's worth 1 life. If you're on this line, you've got a chance of a half of saving 2 lives, you'll say that's better than 1 life. And if you're on the line down here, you'll say it's not quite as good. I think the line down here is very tempting, because if I offer you either a sure bet of saving 1 life and a chance of a half of saving 2 lives, I think we'll probably all go for the certainty, just because it's a bit safer. So I personally prefer the straight line. Line represents something called expected value. And there'll be a bit of quick maths here, and then we'll move on. But the expected value of an action is just the probability of success multiplied by the payoff if you are successful. So if I offer you an opportunity to save 2 lives with probability a half, that's a half times 2. That's equal to 1 life. Or you could put it like that. If there are different conditions, not just success and failure, but sort of success, minus success, and lots of different things, then you can have the formal equation, which we don't need to worry about too much. So I'm going to say now a few reasons why I think we should just say that risky choices are just, we should just evaluate them by expected value. We should say that a half chance of saving 2 lives is just worth saving 1 life. That's basically this approach. But here are the reasons for having a straight line. The first is simplicity. If we go for anything other than a straight line, then we kind of need to justify why it is that we're deviating, we're having like some more complex story. Here, it is the absolute simplest list of values that we can give to different chances. If we go for a funny curve, then I think we need a good story for why that is. So simplicity says that we should stick with a straight line. That's not quite good enough. So another reason why I think we should go with this one is in cases like this, where we might repeat the same bet. So say I offer you this, it's a bit small, isn't it? Okay. So I offer you two options. Maybe this is 2 places that you can donate your money or use your career. One of them is a sure bet, so say donating to global health. If it's successful, you save 1 life, but the probability of being successful is 1, so you're definitely going to save a life. The long shot is much riskier. So there's a probability of 0.99, 99%, that you fail, that you don't make any difference. But there's a 1% chance that you save 101 lives. So just slightly more than 100. If you multiply 1% by 101, you get a little bit more than 1. So you might think, yeah, I want the sure bet. The sure bet sounds great. It's obviously better. But if I offered you that 100 times in a row, and you took the sure bet 100 times in a row, you would be guaranteed a payoff of 100. Yep, you would save 100 lives. But if you took the long shot every time, 100 times in a row, you'd have a 37% chance of getting nothing, of failing. You'd have a 37% chance of saving more than 100 lives, 101, and then you'd have, I think, what is that, 74, a 26% chance of saving way more lives than that. You might get 202, 303, 404, anywhere up to 10,100. When you repeat it 100 times, you're virtually guaranteed, or you've got a 63% chance of doing better if you choose this one. So I think even if you're sort of, you don't like risk, you don't like missing out on having saved a life, if you choose this one, you're missing out on saving a whole lot more lives, almost definitely, or 63% chance or something. So if we take if we go for something other than a straight line, if we go for something other than a straight line, like the curve that's underneath, the risk-averse one where we don't like risk, then we have to sort of, we miss out on a bunch of value because we have to choose this one if we repeat the thing over and over again. And I think that's actually super important because the effective altruism community is quite a large group of people doing good stuff. And if each of us by ourselves, we go and choose sure bets, we just say work on global health or whatever it might be, then our impact is going to be kind of like this. It'll be certain, but it won't be very big. But if all of us by ourselves, like even just with a group of 100 people, went and took the slightly riskier option, based on it having a higher sort of expected value, based on it sort of valuing lives and stuff along this straight line, then we could get a whole lot more. In fact, we've got 70% chance of getting a whole lot more. And I think that's quite important. Such that if we're actually, as a community, trying to do a lot of good, then we should choose the second one. Okay. There's also a slightly technical reason for preferring the straight line, which is this consistency, meaning that if you're evaluating your choices as one choice, and then another choice, and then another choice, you want that to be consistent with if you just took all the choices together. You don't want to be puzzling over what you should do based on whether you think of three choices at a time or one at a time. And it's, with the same example, sort of anything other than the straight line will say that, something other than the straight line might say that you should choose the first one. But, if you were to consider all the choices together, then it says choose the other one. So that it's kind of a technical point that if you want to be consistent, then you have to have this straight line. You have to accept risk and value it in that way. Okay. And if you've got a 1 in a million chance of saving 1 million lives, that's just as good as saving one life. Which seems counterintuitive. Why wouldn't we say that a 1 in a million chance of saving 1 million lives should be worth a lot less? That's kind of feels a bit crazy. And I get that feeling. When we're talking about things like money, then yeah, it seems a bit crazy to say I would pay $1,000 for a 1 in 1,000 chance of $1 million. That's quite a scary sort of. That's a very expensive lottery ticket, and it's not a very good deal because $1,000 that we have right now is worth quite a lot to us, whereas the $1 million won't improve our lives very much. Money is sort of special in that the more we have of it, the less we value it. The next dollar is worth less and less. It's diminishing. Whereas human lives, when we're trying to improve the world, are not like that. Every life is worth the same amount. Even if we've saved 100 lives, the next life is still worth a life. Okay. So now for some more sort of practical examples. Say we forget all of that and we decide, well, actually, you know what? I do care about risk. I do think that saving a 1 in 100 chance of 100 lives is not as good as saving one life. If that's the case, if you want to be risk averse, as they call it, then what should you do in practice? If you just sort of accept that and you think it's the right way of going. Here's a choice you might face. You could either work on global health or you could work on existential risks. Sort of saving a life with certainty for your donation, or having a 1 in 1,000 chance of saving 1,000 lives if, say, you work on preventing pandemics or nuclear war or something like that. And here I've put how much good you do when you do that thing. So if you donate to something in global health, you definitely save one life. That's the difference you make. If you're working on existential risks, then, thank you, then there's a very good chance that the good that you do is nothing. And there's a small chance that it's absolutely enormous, right? And putting it this way, then risk aversion, this sort of curved line, which I think sort of fits most of our intuitions, it says, do this one. Work on global health, work on things that are safe bets. But I don't think that's quite the right way to look at it. So we're looking at how much good you do, the impact you have, which is one thing. But I think what we actually care about is how much good is in the world. Not how many lives you've saved, but how many happy lives there are. For instance, we shouldn't prefer the world in which you've saved one life, but loads of other people have died, to the world in which the other people don't die, but you don't save a life. It's far more important that people don't die than that you get to say, "Oh, I saved a life." You know, it's the lives that are important, not the glory. Is my thinking. So, yeah, I think this is the more accurate way to put it. How much good is in the world? That's the payoff we should think about, and the probability of that payoff. If we work on global health, there's still a chance that the world will end. There's still a chance that a catastrophe will happen. Very small chance. Oh. So a very small chance that the only good in the world will be just the one life you save. And most probably, there'll actually be a whole lot of value in the world. 1,000 people having happy lives, plus one extra life that you saved by working on global health. If, say, instead, you worked on existential risks, then there's a 999 in 1,000 chance that the world was going to be fine anyway, right? And then there's a small chance that you've saved the world, or you've prevented this huge catastrophe. It doesn't have to be saving the world. It could just be preventing a pandemic or something that's quite small, which is actually the same as this. So you've got certainty of the world being good versus working on global health is actually risking catastrophe. If we look at the good that's in the world, then this one is far riskier because you're not preventing this risk of loads of people dying. So this risk aversion, having this kind of curvy line, or not liking risk, as you might say, says that we should work on existential risks. We should work on preventing catastrophes in that case, if the probabilities and the payoffs are like this. Okay, we can make that a bit more realistic by looking at a case like this. If you work on existential risk, you're not going to reduce the chance of catastrophe to 0. There's still going to be some chance of an unpreventable catastrophe. So just looking at global health at the top, just ignore that. You've got, say, a 90% chance of the world being fine and a 10% chance of a huge catastrophe somewhere. If the world is fine, then you've got 1,000 lives happening, probably like 10 billion lives happening, plus one that you save. And if the world's going to end, then you've saved one life, and then you don't get the 1,000, so you just get one. Okay? If you work on preventing catastrophes, then there is a chance that the world was going to be fine, and you get 1,000 happy lives with probability 90%. There's also a chance of an unpreventable catastrophe, roughly 10%, and you get 0. And then there's a chance that you make the difference, that your actions have actually prevented the world from ending or prevented thousands of people from dying. And so this is a bit more realistic than saying you will definitely save the world if the world needs saving. But still, in this more realistic case, this kind of curvy line, it does say that this is better, that we should focus on this. Okay. So here's another case where it starts to change. Sorry for the many slides of numbers, but this is quite important in that if we just ramp up the probability of the world ending, we make it 50%. That roughly 50% that we'll get 0, 50% chance that there's only one there. If we work on global health, there's a 50% chance we get 1,000 happy people plus one happy person that you save. If the world was going to end, if there's going to be a catastrophe, then there's one happy life that you've saved, but then the rest of the world is terrible. If we worked on existential risks instead, or preventing catastrophes, then 50% chance that the world is great, almost 50% chance that the world is terrible, and then this tiny chance that you make a difference. Now, in this case, the probability of catastrophe is just so high that actually the curvy line says that this is better. There is a level of catastrophe. If the world is really close to ending, then actually having a curvy line, being averse to risk, says that we should not bother doing anything about it. It also requires that you have a really, really curvy line, that you say a 50% chance of saving 2 lives is worth much, much, much less than saving 1 life. That's the only case in which it actually favors it. Okay. So, just to back up, the general argument is, from a lot of people who, but if they justify that based on this sort of risk aversion, not liking risk, then I don't think that goes through. Here's another situation where people might want to say, because they don't like risk, that they're going to do something other than just what maximizes expected value. And that's diversification. So say you've got 3 choices now. You could work on global health, you could work on existential risks, or you could work a bit on both. You could split them 50-50. That way, you've got a bit of a chance of saving the world, but you've also kind of got this certain payoff of definitely saving a life, or saving half a life in a low-income country. Again, considering how much good is actually in the world and the probability of that payoff. So if we work on global health, say there's a 90% chance that everything's fine. There are 1,000 people plus 1 who you save. And then there's a chance of a catastrophe, but you've still saved 1 person. Working on existential risk, pretty good chance that everything's fine and you didn't need to. Roughly 9% chance that there's a catastrophe that you couldn't prevent anyway. And then very, very tiny chance that you do prevent a catastrophe. And then you could diversify. So again, more options or more possible states of the world. There's still a good chance that everything's fine, in which case you've saved half a life, kind of, because you've put half your energy into global health. There's a 9% chance that there's an unpreventable catastrophe, in which case, the world is mostly empty, but you've still saved half a life by doing that little bit on global health. And then chance of a preventable catastrophe, which, because you diversified, you didn't prevent. And so very low probability, and again, you just have half a life saved. But if you actually prevent the catastrophe with your 50% stake in existential risk, then the world is pretty great, but again, that's pretty unlikely. But the thing is, if you plug all of these into your risk-averse graph here, yeah?
Can you please just quickly go back to the curve
Yep.
line and explain what that means?
Okay, yes. That's okay. Won't make much sense without the curvy line. So, okay. So when we're comparing a choice to save a life to another option of maybe saving a life, having just some probability of saving a life, then we want to say how much that's worth. If the probability was 0, we know how much that's worth. It's worth nothing. It's worth the same as saving no lives. And if it's 100%, then it's the same as saving 1 life. And of course, the greater the chance of saving a life, the more it should be worth. So there's got to be some line connecting the two. That line could be straight, in which case it's just sort of 50% chance is worth half as much. It could be like this, in which case we like risk, and if it's like this, then we don't like risk. Does that make sense? Cool. Sorry, that's just quite important, so I figured, yes, that is worth going back to. Okay, diversification. Yeah, so even now with this other sort of extra safe option of diversifying over both things, actually the curvy line says we should still prefer this one. If we do the sort of calculations, we put them on this graph, then actually this one comes out best by quite a lot. So it says not to diversify. This whole action of choosing to diversify among risks is not really well justified. Okay. I think that's a good point to see you have any questions? Thank you. That's all from me. Oh, yeah, any questions?
I think that most of the results of this investigation comes from the type of the curve you selected. I think this is cornerstone of the theory you present now.
Mm-hmm.
So I think this type of curve should be much more selection of the type of the curve should be much more solid.
Okay.
I think this key feature of the theory, and the type of selection of the curve should be very, very
More informed?
yeah.
More justified?
Yeah.
Okay.
Justified, yeah.
Yeah, I can see that. Cool. So it's going to take a while to get back to it, but anyway, the curvy line. The thing is, all of the results, except for one, just rely on the line being below the straight line. So it could be sort of very shallow. It could be quite close to it. But as long as it's below, then we get almost all of these results. There is just the one result which says that if we think the chance of extinction is sort of 50% or something crazy, then there are certain curves down here which will say, okay, now you need to, now it doesn't matter because it's going to happen anyway. But all of the other stuff, as long as the risk of extinction is low, then actually just like almost any curve will give us that. That changes if you get one of the curves going above. So if you say, you know, a 1 in 100 chance of saving 100 lives is worth more than saving 1 life, then yeah, you'll disagree. But I think that's crazy. So the intuition that lots of people have is that 1 in 100 chance of saving 100 lives, they're not willing to take that bet. It's not very safe. It's quite a long shot. There are very few people arguing that we should actually like seek out risk and just, you know, maximize the risk, even if on average we'll do worse. Gamblers do, but then again, gamblers lose a lot of money. It seems like poor decision making. I think like the worry does hold in like some small domain, but in general, like virtually any curve that anyone is ever going to use to model how they think about risk is going to say, well, actually, if you're here, you should worry about existential risk a lot. If you're down here, you should. And if you, like, no matter what it is, you should care quite a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
No worries. Yeah?
I am now having some troubles trying to drive practical implementations of the theory.
Okay.
I mean, whether you should donate to some organizations doing this thing versus that thing, or you should work for them instead. So.
Yeah.
Could you please repeat the question, every question
Oh.
you ask? Because, yeah, you have the only mic in the room.
Oh dear. Okay. Yes.
So you
That
repeat the question and then you answer.
that will test my memory. So.
Summarize.
Yeah. So, what are the practical implications for people actually making decisions? Is what I took the question to be. I think, in practice, there's been quite a lot of research on comparing different causes. Like the effective altruism community is full of these different like research organizations that spend a lot of time thinking about just how good is it to say try to affect policy change in a country, how good is it to like reduce the risk of catastrophe, how good is it to like save a life. That's, I mean, saving a life through global health is pretty straightforward, like it's pretty good. The practical implications being, now that we've got this research saying like the probability, 80,000 hours is particularly good for this. They give a few quantitative estimates. Since we've got this research, we can say, you know, we've got the probability and how good it is to, if the thing pays off. So by working on existential risk or pandemic preparedness or one of these sort of risky areas, we have the data for that. We also know we have the data for global health. Now we can compare the two. So when we're choosing where to donate our money, if we want to donate money to somewhere, then this is going to say that actually we should think seriously about donating it over here. If the numbers are right, I think in practice they will end up, the numbers will end up being sort of compelling for just giving the money to existential risk and like taking these catastrophic risks quite seriously. Also for like choosing our careers, if we're still choosing, or like choosing where to volunteer our time, or deciding like what policy issues to care about when we go to vote at an election. I think there was something on this way back at the start, but anyway, when it comes to actually practically answering the question of effective altruism of how do we do the most good, how do we do good effectively, what should I do if I agree with this, I think this will like largely determine what that is.
Thank you.
No worries.
Maybe tell us about some examples of how people make decisions about that. Some interesting examples that you have.
So,
Maybe something in your experience, your organization's experience.
okay. So one thing that I did some research on quite a while back was different ways of reducing child mortality in sub-Saharan Africa. Or like a few different causes that seem to benefit that. So there's, I think it's still the case that one of the most exciting of these charities is the Against Malaria Foundation, which you can find online. And it was the case that if you donated about $3,500 to them, American dollars, that would save one life of a child who's roughly 5 years old. It would save sort of the equivalent of a child the age of 5. But there were other options as well that we're considering, which weren't quite as straightforward. As far as this being straightforward, actually. So what they do is they just provide bed nets to people in malaria-affected areas. They just give bed nets to everyone who might need one. And as a result, for every like 500 bed nets that they give out, roughly, one fewer children end up going to hospital and dying in the ensuing years. So it ends up being like roughly on average, 3,500 per life. Another charity that I looked into for a while, by regression to the mean, almost definitely.
Yeah.
There we go. So Project Healthy Children was doing something slightly riskier. They were going into countries and they were trying to change the food production process. They were trying to get the flour and the salt and the, I don't know what else, like the beans and the honey and whatever sort of food people produced. They were trying to get iodine added to it, and vitamin A, and all the other vitamins that I don't remember the names of. These things that would just vastly improve the health of thousands and thousands of children. And they're specifically looking at countries where like the levels of childhood stunting were severe, where anemia was a huge problem, where people were dying and where people were living like extremely poor lives because they just couldn't get these basic nutrients. And if you're on like a starvation wage, it's quite hard to go to the pharmacy and buy multivitamins. No one's going to do that. So they were sort of trying to get put in place this very cheap procedure of just like dump the multivitamins into the food. And it's very cheap to do, it's very effective. It's done in like every developed country in the world. If you go and buy salt at the supermarket, it's iodized salt most likely. And that's quite good for our health, but we don't notice it. Anyway, Project Healthy Children, they took around, I think, it was something like tens of thousands of dollars to go into any given country. And they only had a small chance of success. It was unclear if the next country they went into, they could make this happen. But if they made it happen, then that would save way more lives than the same donation to AMF. So it ended up being that on average, if you multiply the probability of their success by the benefits of if they did succeed, I think it was a bit lower than $3,500. But then it becomes a judgment call for me deciding which charity to donate to. Do I want to be able to say to myself, my donation saved a life? Definitely. Or do I want to say to myself, I did the most good on average or in expectation? It's not as reassuring to be able to tell yourself that. But if we all do that, then we do a lot more good together. And if we all do that over time with like repeated donations, then we do a whole lot more good. So that's the sort of case where this comes into play, and it entirely determines what it is you choose to do. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah?
I want to ask about repetition.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if the probability is very low, then you can be in a situation where your repeated donations or effort would not sum up to probability of sure bet.
Yep.
Or like if there's a 1 in a million chance that you can prevent nuclear war, then you need like a million people to do this with you together.
Yep.
And million people working on preventing nuclear war looks
It's unlikely.
realistic.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. I'll remember to repeat the question this time. So the question was, with repetition, if the probability is a lot lower than 1 in 100, if it's like 1 in a million, for instance, with preventing nuclear war, you probably aren't going to get a million people working separately to do this thing, and so the argument maybe doesn't go through. Is that accurate-ish? I'm also trying to think of an answer at the same time, which makes it hard. But okay, so I think yeah, that's an excellent objection. It's not just the case for a single cause though. In fact, it might not hold. This might not be relevant for a single cause because everyone's working towards the same thing. It's not independent rolls of the dice. It's the same big roll of the dice. So what you need is in fact a million different rolls of the dice, a million different causes that people are working on. I think with the effective altruism community at the moment, maybe there'll be some things that are just so astronomically improbable that maybe we don't get enough rolls of the dice to make repetition a compelling reason. And some philosophers reckon that like this repetition or like law of large numbers is not a good enough reason to accept expected value. And maybe that's true for like probabilities that are like a billionth of a percent. I think probabilities where it's like 1 in 100 or something, it's definitely worth it. So like the Project Healthy Children thing, it comes through. But in general still, so if you think about it in your everyday life, of the number of 1 in a million events that happen, which you may or may not like maximize expected value in those situations. A lot of them won't have huge payoffs, a lot of them will be quite minor, but if you maximize expected value over all of those little events, an example of this, maybe sort of opening a book and it having a particular word on it, like the chances of that are like 1 in 26 to the power of the number of letters. Like opening a book and seeing a particular word, the chance of that word being there is just tiny, given the number of words, the different numbers of arrangements of letters. And so we have like a lot of these rolls of the dice all the time. It's just the case that most of them don't have a whole lot of payoff attached to them. Yeah, so that might help with sort of justifying using this all the time when we've got throughout our lives these many 1 in a million chances happening, and when you've got sort of thousands of people also doing the same thing at the same time, and you want like the maximum good produced by all those thousands of people, then expected value is going to be like probably the better approach, even with tiny probabilities. Of course, the probabilities still might get tiny enough that maybe it's not, but tiny probabilities are something maybe we shouldn't worry about too much. Yeah. Also, we can chat after. I also need to like think more about this. Yeah.
As a social entrepreneur, I'm interested also in the question of practical application, but more from not the point of investing, but from the point of how do I in my company think of better application of this research to make sure that we bring more value more value than more value. Dots.
Tell us about what you do.
We have this huge problem in Russia with the villages who are just dying, people leaving from the villages. Old people just stay there, and the villages die over. So from the 90s, we had more than 150,000 villages officially that stopped existing, and this process is continuing. So bigger urbanization that brings more problems and less villages. And what my social enterprise does, we find active people in those villages, and we create a strong active community in the villages to make sure that the local community starts developing them. So they stop dying, but they start developing. So that's what we do, and I'm interested now in how can I make sure that we have more possibility of less risk, more success. I don't know how to say it. More impact, more social impact.
So the question is, where's that coming out of? So the question, and I'll try and remember as much of it as I can.
Yeah, actually it's okay. I just increased the volume. It's okay.
Oh, perfect. Okay, perfect. So yeah, I think with social entrepreneurship, there might be like different concerns as well, because you do also want it to be sort of a viable company. You don't want to sort of lose all your cash reserves. You don't want it to go under, because sort of getting a payoff of zero, or getting a very tiny payoff, it's not just this much worse than the maximum payoff. It's actually like this much worse, because then it means like you can't have any impact in future. So I think in businesses and in social enterprises, it's worth being a little bit risk averse. As far as maximizing impact though, so if your profits are kind of guaranteed, but then it's just a matter of choosing among different things which won't risk profits, but which will have like varying impacts. Say you're putting your resources towards one town which you know that this person is like very trustworthy. This person is going to like rejuvenate the town a little bit, but it's a pretty small town, and it being rejuvenated isn't as important as like rejuvenating this like ghost city where there's just like no one left. So if you sort of like think about the probabilities of that working and the payoff of if it does, then you might say how good that is, and you might compare it to another city where, say, the people you're attracting back are sort of less trustworthy, or I mean, that's a terrible way to put it, but the person is less promising, or the program is less promising, or like less likely to succeed. But if it does, it will just be amazing. Because say this city, there's a small chance that getting this person back there will like rejuvenate this, like maybe the city has a long architectural history, or like some great heritage or something, and there's a chance that it'll just sort of like pick up momentum and do really well. And so you figure out the probabilities, and they're quite low, but the payoff is really high. Then I think the right way to go, if like profits aren't an issue there, is sort of just multiplying the probabilities by the values, and not just going for the safe one. Sometimes doing things which are risky, but if they pay off really well. Yeah, I'm not sure if that's actually helpful at all, but I don't know much about the area.
Speaking of villages, saving them, I wonder how to compare saving some local village and saving some village in Africa or somewhere else. How do you work with that?
So personally, I think so with villages it might be slightly more complicated, because the amount of sort of cultural value or other things, it might be like much more complicated, because you're trying to benefit people via this very indirect method of sort of like improving the environment around them, or sort of bringing back a village and its local life, and then people like have a better life because they move there and things are better because of that, versus just like giving someone a drug and they don't die. It's a bit more complicated because of that. But as far as the general question of like choosing between helping people here versus helping people elsewhere, I think there's absolutely no difference. If someone is dying like a block away, or someone is dying in your town or in your city, they happen to have the same skin color as you, they happen to come from the same country, that is no worse an event than someone dying in sub-Saharan Africa. Like that person there, they have a family that love them, they have friends that care about them, they have, you know, happy experiences, just like any one of us, and them dying is just as much of a tragedy. Of course, it's hard to sort of live that out in practice, because we hear a lot of news about what happens in our own country and sort of people's lives going badly down the street. But I think on a moral level, we can't say that our lives are any more valuable than theirs.
Yeah, but there might be a cost difference.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah, I think generally the cost is much lower in low-income countries. So for health interventions, it's a lot easier to get drugs to them than to get drugs to people here, because generally, like, people here are being treated for like the basic conditions. The hospital system here is a lot better than in Malawi or somewhere like that. I mean, there's sort of a scale of like maybe the hospitals in Switzerland are just, you know, we're not doing as well as them. I mean, Australia's definitely not, but sort of we are all doing a lot better than certain countries right at the bottom of the scale. So in fact, I think that's like additional reason to help them rather than help people here. But that's quite hard to do. And I certainly don't stick to it all the time, so yeah. Yeah?
I have a pair of questions regarding
Okay.
the slide that is present now.
Okay.
The next reason for choosing a straight line over the curved ones is consistency, if I recall correctly.
Yep.
But when talking about consistency, I felt that it was very much like simplicity. So the first question is whether there is something special about consistency, or it is very much like simplicity.
Yeah. So yeah, consistency is kind of a, like the term it gets in the literature is agglomeration, but that's not a word that many people use in real life. So it is kind of justified by simplicity, but simplicity in a different sense. It's a bad thing, especially for simplicity, but it's sort of bad for a slightly different reason to just wanting a nice, neat, straight line. The problem is that, like, say over your life, you're taking all these different decisions. If you use a straight line, if you maximize expected value, then it doesn't matter whether you take each decision separately or you take them all as just one big set of decisions. But if you have anything other than a straight line, then if you look at sort of decisions by themselves, or you clump them together in some way, or you know, look them all. Yeah, or no, it actually makes them contradict. So it'll say, no, you shouldn't do it. Even though, you know, looking at them by themselves, yes, you should do it every time, but no, you shouldn't do all of them together. And I think that's a bit crazy. It's sort of, contradictions are bad. Yeah.
And if I may, the second question regarding that same slide, the way the question is posed is why choose a straight line? And I think it makes sense to consider the opposite question. I mean, why should we consider the curved lines, and maybe why should we prefer them for reasons other than some behavioral or intuitive patterns shared by many people, such as risk aversion?
Yeah.
Are there any other reasons for choosing curved lines?
Also, the curved lines, they just are risk aversion. Like, risk aversion consists in having a curved line rather than a straight line. At least if the line is the one that's on the bottom rather than on the top. Yeah, so I think the reasons are purely intuitive. There aren't a lot of like theoretical advantages to having a curved line. It seems to just produce problems. And for the straight line, you can prove all these nice results, like expected utility theorems and those sorts of things in the mathematics. They have all these great properties, whereas the curved lines don't. The curved lines are a bit of a mess. They satisfy some properties, but not others. And I think like things like consistency and so on just make them like a bit ridiculous. But I mean, like even if you did accept one of them, then if anything, that gives you more reason to like worry about catastrophes, which I think is like a cause area that is like really important and is possibly one of our best opportunities to help the world. Yeah, no worries. Yeah.
This can be somewhat provocative.
Okay.
Are we morally obliged to drop our local local villages and projects to help them and to go fix Malawi first?
I don't think so.
Why?
I think
How is this consistent?
yeah, so there's a difference between the sort of obligation and something called supererogation. You can have different views on what you're required to do, but you can agree on what is like a better outcome. I think like in theory, a lot of people will agree that like saving as many lives as possible is better, but we don't feel obligated to do it. We might think like if we can make small changes to sort of increase the number of lives we save, or like small changes to help improve the world, then I think most of us are likely to take it, and that's great. But when you start talking of like obligation of like everyone needs to drop what they're doing and go do this other thing, then it's like no one's going to do it, and also it's just kind of horrible to hear. So it's pretty counterproductive. And like philosophically, you can say that it's not obligatory. You can have these like different categories of rightness. Like some things are absolutely wrong, like at least in certain cases, like murdering people, torturing people, like obviously wrong. And then you've got all these permissible things, some of which you have to do, and some of which are kind of optional. And we can disagree on what's obligatory and optional, but we can agree on like what's better, even if we don't go to the very top.
Yeah, what was an extreme one, but if we aren't obliged to help someone effectively, why do that at all? Like, why help? Why calculate expected value if you aren't, if it isn't moral to do so, to act on this?
So that it's moral. It can be moral in a different sense, and like I personally feel obligated to like do the maximum thing. Of course, like the maximum thing will vary slightly for everyone because we have different skill sets and everything, and we have like different levels of resources and stuff. But like I personally think it is obligatory, but I don't want to alienate people who don't think it's obligatory, and I don't want to alienate people who are like doing great work on other things, and it would be like very inconvenient to just change completely. Yeah, I personally think it's obligatory, but others might not, and I think that's okay. It's still like you can still agree that like it's better in some sense, it's moral in some sense, but we're not required to do it.
So where is the conflict in preference and expected value? Like third variable, like value, probability, and preferences. So
there's like the actual facts of the world of like which include like probability and how many lives are saved. Then there's facts about how good those things are. And then you have facts about what you should do. And you can have different things in each of those categories, and we can disagree about one category but agree on others. I think actually we probably agree on all three categories, maybe. It sounds like it. But if people don't agree on like the final one of what you are required to do, then that's fine. So an example of this, just to like give a case that like people will commonly disagree on. If I'm not sure how loaded this is, but if someone's being taken away to be executed, or maybe like several people are, and the soldier or whoever says, it could be, so they're being taken away to be executed, and you complain, you say, no, that's wrong, they did nothing wrong, and the soldier says, well, let me execute you instead, and then I'll spare them. Are you required to sacrifice your own life to save a few others? I think like a lot of people feel like they're not required to. It's amazing if you do, and there's loads of movies where people do, and it's like really heartwarming. But I think like maybe that's asking a bit much. Maybe people will like disagree on whether that's obligatory, but we can still agree that it's better. That is the best thing to do, but it might not be required.
So if you want to activate your preferences, do this effectively.
Yeah, yeah. So you might have slightly different preferences, such as like not dying, and that might be a very strong preference. And I think it's okay to hold that preference and act on it. Yeah, and maybe that's similar in this case, that like you can have a preference for like sticking with your current career, and that's great, and it's fine. But yeah, like maybe it's asking a bit much to like say we should all like drop everything and like go protest about like nuclear weapons or something. Might be asking a bit much. But still, if we can like improve a little bit or like make a little difference here or somewhere, then that's also good. Yeah. I think I've exhausted everyone.
Yeah. What are some of the challenges that effective altruism as a community is facing now?
Okay.
In your opinion?
Yeah. I'm not the absolute expert on this, not by any means, but opinions that I've sort of heard people voice. And like there's some evidence that they are like very true, that the community is currently like far more, it is like quite talent constrained, that we have like lots of job opportunities like opening up in organizations that we think are really good opportunities, and we're sort of struggling to fill them with like the best and the brightest, that actually we need like lots more people like excited to like work on high impact things. And actually at this point it looks like donations might not be too important. There's like enormous foundations like the Open Philanthropy Project that are now sort of like throwing money at good things. And there's a chance that if you donate money to a really good organization, that they would have just donated to them anyway. And so it looks like, at least for organizations that have their attention, that maybe it's less effective to donate and more effective to help out in other ways. So like further on the views that people have sort of expressed and like problems that seem to exist, one of them is that like a lot of people involved are sort of part-time involved, sort of like have an interest, read the books, read the blog posts, but like what the community is like desperately in need of is like more people helping out. Like even like more people community building and everything is also like a huge boost, because it like then like attracts more people that can like help out with things. And it seems generally like career choice at the moment is like a far better way to like have an impact than by like donating a little bit more. I think that yeah, that's for sure. All right, I think that's probably worn everyone out. Shall we finish up there? Shall we finish up there?
Can we throw
Cool.
in the last one?
Oh, okay, yeah, if you want.
Can you put a number on like how much money needed to fix all the identified problems in the world at once?
Oh, there's a TEDx talk on this by Beth Barnes, and she sort of figured it out. She has nice graphs and everything, and I won't try and do a better job than her of expressing it. But she works out that what's that? Oh, so I mean less than $1 trillion per year to just fix everything, and also do all this other stuff. But if the 10% richest people in the world gave 10% of their money to like the most effective causes, and that money was spent effectively, then yeah, we could eradicate global poverty with $195 billion a year for 20 years, and it'd just be done. Global poverty would be, extreme poverty would be absolutely eradicated. Almost all public health issues, could, I think, triple medical research funding, sort of safeguard every rainforest in the world, send like several manned missions to Mars. Not that that's like quite as high a priority as dealing with these other things, but like less than like roughly in the range of $1 trillion would just fix everything.
Why didn't they?
That's a very good question. If I had $1 trillion, it would be fixed. But also, I'd probably need to ask a lot of people a lot cleverer than me on like actually how to spend it. Yeah. Cool. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.